And good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 5280 podcast. I'm Glenn Hauser with Cam Parker. We got 50% of the grouping, but 100% of the content. So, Cam, how's it going tonight? And doesn't it feel like the Bronco game was miles behind us?
It feels like it was like a year ago or a couple months ago. It feels like it was a while ago, but yeah, it's nice. I think you and I said it's like this feels like the first time you and I are doing a 5280,
Mhm.
just the two of us. So it's okay though. People in the chat, we're gonna dock Mike and Gage for being absent, so that it goes against their um, you know just all the tallies that we've been going on. So it'll be nice.
Right. Whatever's the opposite of the checks in the mail, that's going to apply to those two guys for this particular
Exactly.
week. But I mentioned the Broncos' previous game and the Sean Payton homecoming, and it's been a few days, but it's certainly worth talking about. Banged up New Orleans Saints team, not just offense, and the Broncos just absolutely manhandled them. It was not in doubt for any period of time. It's a nice feeling. I kind of like that.
Yeah, I think that when you look at from the game perspective, obviously we can say what we feel like from the objective point of view, which is had Derek Carr been in the game, had Chris Olave been in the game, Rashid Shaheed been in the game, it might have been a different outcome or obviously a much different scoring output. But you also can handle the teams that are on your schedule. And for what the Broncos were gifted, if you will, if you want to use that unfortunate term, but with what they had on their schedule, with the players that were out and all the players that were, you have to take care of business. And at that point, you got to take care of opponents that are much lesser than you. And in calling it for what it is, the Saints at that particular point were a much lesser opponent than you going into Thursday night. And you also could argue, and I'm sure we'll have this conversation too, but it's like you could also argue that the Broncos needed this win as much as the Saints probably needed that win. Obviously, the Saints were reeling going into that Thursday night game, losing 4 straight, and then obviously ended up being 5 straight. But coming off of the game that they had against the Chargers where they lost, like they needed one where they can just get that taste out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that the Broncos envisioned going into that game was perfect. I mean, even from Sean's point of view, just like let's just play a football game. Let's go home. Let's get that W. And they did that. They accomplished it. And they curb stomped one more time again another NFC South opponent. So I don't know if this is a theme for the season. But the Broncos have at least guaranteed themselves going 500 against the NFC South.
Right, with 2 more games to go, including this one coming up. But just going back to the Saints game, Sean Payton goes back there and he showed up, I think, about 5 hours in advance. Took an Uber himself. Walked around the stadium, got kind of acclimated to what it's like to be a visitor in the Superdome. And this meant a lot to him. And it was cool when you saw him with the game ball in Club Dub, looked like a haunted house with the fog machine.
Yeah.
And Riley Moss even said that he got emotional, Sean did in his post game remarks, and he thought it was very cool for him to see that. So
yeah, and actually to that point, Glenn, if you go out and you Google, I want to say it is Amazon Prime Video or NFL on Prime or something on YouTube, you can get a chance to see the full 7-minute interview that they did, with Bo and Sean. They take a little bit of a clip there from the post game, or the locker room speech, if you will, with Peyton, and you get a glimpse of it. And I'll tell you what, I don't mean to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but for all the people that feel like Sean Payton doesn't care or he's egotistical and all he cares about is himself, like go watch that 30-second clip or whatever from that Saints game against the Broncos and after that game against them, and you can't tell me that he does not care for that football team. You know what I mean? Like he absolutely cares for every single player that is on that roster, every single player that is on that team, and he cares. Like it was abundantly clear that he cares for that team.
But that is a good point, Cam. Like when you think of a guy who's a major hard ass, presumably a my way or the highway type of guy, that when he shows emotion in front of his players, humanizes him to a bit. It doesn't take away how he coaches, how they look at him, how they abide by what he'd like them to do, and the changes that he's making within the organization. But I think it does show a human side that is not often seen. And that was cool too, because he'd never actually, Peyton, I'm saying, when he came back outside to sit with the prime crew, I think he did that because he's friendly with Carissa Thompson and he had worked with her at Fox. But he'd never been into a post-game situation like that where he gave up his time and sat there. And it was cool that Bo was sitting there. And I got to tell you, like, I think we really struck gold as far as like just a mature first-time quarterback. The way Bo carries himself in these interviews with these questions, guy's obviously super intelligent, very funny, but deadpan at the same time. I think I can see why Sean is excited that he's going to be his protege for years to come.
Yeah, and I think that specifically, when you look at the game against the New Orleans Saints, we might as well lead into like our big topic, right? Because like, going into this game, like they were kind of searching for a bit for a winning formula. And, all of us were kind of talking a little bit about how, they really needed to establish a running game, and you need to get a chance to see, Bo Nix use his legs and possibly see a little bit more creative designs for some of those wide receivers, the young wide receivers, or just wide receivers in general that could be able to create that space and create a lot of opportunities that's just spread the field. I think it's fair to say, and granted, it was, I will say, like, I think that even though it was that game against Thursday night, I think we can all, one, apologize to Javonte Williams for maybe some of the comments, maybe saying like we're already off the bus a little bit about Javonte Williams, and maybe we should kind of like hold it a little bit, because he looked fantastic. That was the first time I want to say in his career that he had ended up, with 2 rushing touchdowns. But the running formula between he and, again, like, Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte and even Estime for a little bit, it'll be interesting to see how they load management him given his, his other fumble, if you will. But I think that, you add Nix to the mix. Estime did show some really good signs, but Jaleel and obviously Javonte, they've got a really nice mixture of what they can do with the running game. And I even were talking about on the air or before we went on air, is that Nix's ability to run the football really lifts up the entire offense and the ceiling of the entire offense of how far that the offense can go.
Right. And what's interesting about this offense is if you look at their statistics, if you're basing it solely on that, not very impressive. I mean, so and I mentioned it to you earlier, Cam, like this season is almost halfway over. Like it is shocking that we are approaching week 8 in a 17-game season. So, I mean, it's just crazy how this has flown. And if you look at like the statistics, so Bo has 1,246 yards passing. So he's not even averaging 200 yards a game at this point. Javonte, after an 88-yard game against the Saints, has 301 yards rushing to lead the Broncos. Cortland Sutton, he's got 21 receptions for only 277 yards. He does have 2 TDs, including that spectacular one-handed grab against the Chargers. But again, I mean, then your next is Josh Reynolds at 183. Javonte is the 3rd leading receiver. And when you look at the rushing attack, Bo Nix is the 2nd leading rusher on the team at 255. He's only 46 yards behind behind Javonte Williams, but somehow they're getting it done. And I mean, obviously, this defense is carrying this team, but the offense is also taking advantage of these situations. And we can't say enough also about Will Lutz. He is 63 points already this season. I mean, they got 9 points a game. That's pretty spectacular for a kicker. I mean, very, very reliable. So putting things together, and it's and even though the offense has not statistically looked fantastic, you can't base everything on that. If we did, you'd be saying Patrick Mahomes has 6 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, yet somehow this team is undefeated, and they're likely to win against the Raiders this coming weekend.
And I think that, when you tie a bow a little bit on top of it, I think that one of the things that just is, and it does fall a little bit more on, Nick's performance in this regard, but it's something that Sean talked about. And that's just the offense, specifically the way the Bows operated it. They've not been operating in harm's way. Like, they are very much, operating that they are by script or, really taking doing a good job of, really taking care of the football. And I mean, obviously it was not an interception, but I will say, like, that was probably the worst play of the game, which was the near pick of that Bo had, with Tyrann Mathieu. Obviously it didn't happen. So it kind of cancels that stuff out, but you obviously can't ignore it. But like, those are plays that just haven't, not happened, if you will. Like, like it's been a breath of fresh air, and because of, not putting the teams in harm's way, Nick's is not taking sacks either. He's really contributed to that. And then to what Jeff Bryant was mentioning, the offensive line is really starting to come together. It feels like, even for as much as, they were kind of some patchwork, we finally got a chance to see what Mike McGlinchey can, do at that right tackle spot. But then you have a very quick turnaround at center of a very good football game from Alex Forsyth, and so, like, if that trend continues, and as the season progresses, you are going to be having a center dilemma sooner rather than later with guys like Forsyth and Wattenberg, something that obviously they had visioned, was going to come clear as soon as the season started. Well, if Forsyth is playing really well, I'll tell you, like, it's going to be really hard, specifically with how the running game looked. It's going to be really hard to just deviate from that.
I know he looks like he's from the same mold as a Quinn Miners, just with his aggressiveness and willing to put his nose in there. Flying Dragon Films mentions the special teams have improved 1,000% in the Sean Payton era. Couldn't agree more. I mean, this is a team that we would have weekly comments about Tom McMahon. The fact that this guy was such a shit show as a special teams coordinator, and that his unit was just so terrible. It's like, in what world should the special teams coach be, or the coordinator be, discussed in, on a regular basis and not in a positive fashion? And, kudos to Riley Dixon too. This is a guy that they brought in competition all the way to the very end of training camp. And there was a good chance he was going to lose his job. I mean, he was battling and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he was the punter for the Bears last year. So yeah, he was battling him for the spot, and his placement. I can't imagine there's a team that's putting the ball inside the 10 or even the 5 more often than the Denver Broncos at this point.
The safeties that the Broncos have had, I would say there's a large reason why the Broncos have gotten those safeties. And, the defense certainly, resulted in those safeties, but there's in large part a reason why it's resulted in that. And that is because of, those punts inside the 5, being from Riley Dixon. So he's playing like a Pro Bowl punter. I mean, you got to call it for what it is. He's playing like a Pro Bowl punter. And I mean, I think so many people were talking about like the redemption, factor for some of these players. You probably could put Riley Dixon right up there at the top of the list, considering, what his other tenure was like, as a member of the Denver Broncos, and I should say as a draft pick too, because the Broncos drafted him. And funny enough, I think it was actually in the draft class of Justin Simmons, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it just could not, work out in his first stint.
Another thing that's worth noting too, Cam, is that for the last few seasons, especially like during the Russell era, we were very concerned with the lack of points per game that the Broncos were putting up.
Mhm.
And I know, like you referenced the safeties, and I know there've been a couple of defensive touchdowns as well, but they're averaging 23.57 points per game
Yeah.
7 weeks into this, including a couple games where they had the just pulling it up. I mean, the Jets game was the less than ideal conditions, and it was a 10-9, so they put up 10 points. And then against the Steelers, it was a 13-6 loss, so they only put up 6 points. So those two games they put up 16 points, and they're still averaging over 23. So that's things are coming together, and that's what's pretty exciting about this is that I I had gone when we had done our prediction episode, and I had just the orange colored glasses as I often do, and I had us at a 12-5 season, and 2 weeks in, it looked like an absolute disaster. And coming into a game against one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst, we could find ourselves 5-3. I know we've got a couple games that we'll talk about this later, but after that are going to make it hard. But I mean, 12-5 is not going to happen, but double digits really could be the case with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, it could be, and I think that's where specifically the games like this, like the Tampa Bay Bucks game, and and stringing that together with the visit to Greenbrier. Like I you guys know I'm a big proponent of looking at the mental side of it when it comes to sports. But like you had the huge win against the over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which looks like maybe your best win on the entire season, by the way, based on how Baker Mayfield has been playing. And then
Right.
you go out and you basically stay there on the East Coast, and you go stay at Greenbrier for almost a remember the Titans moment for your team. Gathering together your squad, and you go beat the Jets in their own building and bad conditions. We already talked about that. You do have a bad slip up against the Chargers, but then you basically come back and you have maybe your most pivotal moment psychologically and from a team bonding side of things against the Saints in his house, in Peyton's house, and the house that Drew Brees built and Peyton built. I mean, it was like those are the types of games that really can catapult you, and specifically from the standpoint of their winning formula. And the fact that it seems like offensively it's a bit anemic for a majority of the game, and like to your point, like the stats are pretty bad, but like you're still putting up 24 points a game. I mean, like in the games that they are very much controlling, there's at least one touchdown. I would just say one touchdown which gets attributed to the defense, and that's a defensive score. Other than that, you're still talking about 24 to 26 points that get attributed to the offense. And how many times do we get a chance to say that? I mean, and even against the Saints, Glenn, like they were they punted 3 times, but there were like 6 of the last 7 drives that they had in that game went for scoring drives. And that is exactly, something that we have been clamoring for since Manning left.
Right. Just looking at both statistics again, because these next two statistics do tell a story. He has 5 interceptions on the year. He had 4 after the first 2 games when the Broncos were 0-2. He has 9 sacks in the entire year in 7 games. I mean, it's not, I mean, the line is playing solidly, but, Sean, we've said it before. Sean Payton has said that sacks are a quarterback statistic and not an offensive line statistic. I mean, that's another shot at Russ, of course. But the fact is this guy is able to. I think he's even more mobile than any of us had expected, which has been a complete pleasant surprise. And there's positive plays, even if it's a 1-yard play, even if it's getting back to the line of scrimmage. I mean, there's huge value in that, and not being, second and 16, but being second and 9. I mean, there's huge. You have so many more options as far as your play calling when you're in that other situation.
Yeah. And so I did see Big Mike, chime in on the tight end position. That is
I
probably
was going
one
to go back
thing.
to that.
Yeah, it would probably be remiss if we didn't, bring up maybe one of the weakest links of that, as far as like the, some of the players that maybe they would like to add, to that room, and maybe Parham is going to be one of those players, because if you're not going to make any moves, right? If you're not going to make any moves at the trade deadline, which I think as fans we certainly would love to see them go out and make a explosive addition to this team offensively. Uh, you know, I think that adding to this tight end room would make it for a bit of an exciting development. And I think that I will say this, and I did say this on the episode that I did with Jordan. You guys can go check it out on, on our network. But I will say, I do think a minor victory was the involvement we got a chance to see with Lucas Kroll, but specifically from the middle of the field. And
Future Ring of Famer.
Right, future Ring of Famer, maybe even a Hall of Famer. Uh, but like, just the fact that you saw a presence there, right? Like, just the fact you saw a presence there is enough that I think that now for the tight end and for specifically Bo, okay, now we're at the point where, okay, we're getting a little bit comfortable. I've already been kind of using my wide receivers now. We're starting to kind of see the whole field a little bit, and now you're starting to see the tight end get a little bit more involved. But obviously, it's still lacking a little bit, and we know that Parham, given the fact he's like 7'5" of a tight end, he's probably going to catch that ball that was landed between he and Troy Franklin. But I would like to see him be activated, and maybe A.T. Perry here, if they're not going to make some moves at the deadline.
And Dulcich, what a disappointment he's turned out to be. I mean, just a guy that Bronco fans fell for instantly.
Yeah.
Probably the hair didn't hurt, just the personality and the potential. And then not only having these injuries, but then once he gets healthy, to be a healthy scratch 2 weeks in a row. That's why I do want Donald Parham to get a chance to play. You said he's 7'5", and that's really not that crazy of an exaggeration. I mean, he's 6'8", just a massive target. I'm hoping that he does, unless he hasn't grasped the offense or would, for whatever reason. But that would be pretty cool if the Broncos gave him a chance, because that is the glaring weakness in this offense. So just when you were talking about a potential, trade target, do you have a number one tight end target in mind?
Well, I mean, I think the pipe dream is going to be David Njoku. And I think that, obviously there was a certain injury at quarterback with the Browns, and it might actually end up being the best thing that happened to that franchise, for this year. But in the sense of, for how, the offense is going to look and everything, I don't know whether or not the Njoku move is going to happen, whether that's with the Broncos or, just in general. But that would be the pipe dream, I would say. But I mean, number one, that's probably the guy that I would go is
Me too.
Njoku. But obviously there's others.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that team. Clearly, Kevin Stefanski was told that he had to continue to play that quarterback.
Yeah.
And this obviously is Stefanski's out. So, I honestly, I don't understand these guys that are suggesting that Deshaun Watson was any sort of a good guy that deserved fair treatment from the fans. I mean, I think I think that the fans really thought that he never really paid the proverbial price for his offenses, aside from money, and still walks away with $240 million or $230 million guaranteed, and he still got $100 million coming to him. So he'll be fine. But I don't think we need to celebrate him. I mean, if you saw actually him running out onto the field, they boo him in um, in team introductions at home. And I think they're right to do that. Quite honestly, I would if my team brought a guy in like that after knowing everything, I would have a very hard time rooting for that team. Quite honestly,
that's when you know it's a really dysfunctional franchise, and has been for
right.
over 30 years. Like, I mean, it's just like when you look at it from just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It was such a dark scene, him going down for an injury, and the entire almost Browns fan base is booing him as he's on the cart and going into the locker room. Boy, that was something. That was absolutely something. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, you know what they say about karma, man. It's but I can't believe we're talking about the Saints game. We're almost 27 minutes into the show,
Mhm.
and we have yet to mention the name Cody Barton. This was the Cody Barton Bowl for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just look at his stats, and I think he was even more dominating than his stats. 8 total tackles, 1 sack, pass deflection, a QB hit. Then he fumble recovery, and he ran it in for a touchdown. He had another touchdown that was called back on a DJ Jones offsides. This was the most dominating performance by a Bronco defender in recent memory, as far as I'm concerned.
It's funny. I mean, obviously Von Miller had been here, and he's obviously in the last handful of years the most dominant player that they've had defensively. But I can't help but think of when we're talking dominant, of like that was like one of the dominant performances we've seen from a Broncos defender since Darian Stewart picked off the Saints 3 times. Funny enough, like picked off the Saints 3 times, and then I think it was like right after that he ended up getting the contract extension with the Broncos. But that was crazy, because I actually think that if you look at the clip of DJ Jones, if he does not jump offside, right? If he does not jump offside, one, you're talking about maybe one of the most egregious plays we've ever seen in NFL history. And two, you're also talking about a second touchdown, for Barton, because obviously I thought it was a pick six, and it ended up being a fumble recovery. But you just knew it was coming. For some reason, in this entire game, you just knew something was going to break for Barton. The first drive of the game, it literally hits him in the breadbasket, for an interception, and then this happens where, he has the fumble recovery, goes into the end zone, and gets called back for the offsides. So you knew something was going to happen. And what better player could that have ever happened to? Specifically, someone who's been kind of criticized. I mean, like, by at times like us on the channel, and like, well, what better person could that ever happen to? I mean, like, he's been kind of criticized a little bit, and then he has the game of his life. Where he goes out, and the day that Quan Alexander was elevated was the moment that Cody Barton became Luke Kuechly. Like, it was just an unbelievable performance from Barton.
And this is a guy that took over calling the defense from Alex Singleton when Alex got hurt. So he has those responsibilities on top of performing on the field. And for all reports directly from his defensive teammates' mouths, they're saying that this guy's doing a really, really great job doing that.
Yeah. But we would be remiss if we didn't possibly talk about, I see a Flying Dragon Films mentioned in the chat. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about that defensive line, right? We would be if we didn't talk about, I mean, that defensive line, there isn't enough praise that we can, like I will say, like, it's just getting routine, like we had that 5-game winning streak last year, right, Glenn, where it was just like,
Right.
oh, I mean, it's just like okay, is it sustainable? Well, here's your answer. Here's your answer. It's quite sustainable. They're getting pressure from everywhere. John Franklin Myers, comes in. It basically makes this
A
whole
law
unit,
firm.
right? It basically makes it, entirely cohesive, and they're getting contributions from everybody, up from, Pro Football Focus's, Love Child, Zach Allen, to, John Franklin Myers, the newcomer, to even Malcolm Roach, right? And Jordan Jackson got a little bit of some love there, on a play, in that Saints game. And then you go to the outside, right? And that's one of the probably other focuses we're going to have is that pass rush unit. That pass rush unit. I think I said it, just because I was more curious, but
Mhm.
I think we were definitely going to be talking about that pass rush unit, and kind of sleeping on that pass rush unit just a little bit, given the fact of how good that defensive line is. And you're really starting to see just how good of a unit that really is.
Right. I mean, our defense now has 28 sacks, second in the NFL. We actually have 3 guys on pace to get double digits in sacks, led by Nick Benito, and then Cooper and the aforementioned Zach Allen. I mean, this is just an impressive display. And I know, we're excited about the performance against the Saints, and they were really banged up and missing a lot of players. But the fact of the matter is that they're still professionals, and this defense is really performing. Just to give a shout out to DNVR, they had Nick Benito on today on their pod, and it's certainly worth listening to. Here's a guy that has sacks in 5 consecutive games. If he gets a sack this weekend against the Panthers, he ties Von Miller for most consecutive games in Broncos history with a sack. And that is a real possibility that he could get that and then, potentially break it. It's going to be a little bit harder when he's in the following week against Lamar Jackson. But, I mean, this guy, he actually called himself coming out of college a one-trick pony, that he was just a pass rusher, and he's really refined his craft and learned a lot from these guys, and just, and has worked hard, and it certainly shows.
And I think in large part, you also have to give credit to Jamar Cain, because and for anybody that does not know, Jamar Cain was at Oklahoma when Nick Benito really burst onto the scene and became that second round draft pick of the Denver Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes over to LSU, and he coaches up their defensive line. And then obviously that's when Peyton brought in Cain. I want to say it was as a pass rush specialist, and then he ended up becoming to basically then, with the loss of Marcus Dixon, the defensive line coach, to basically become the defensive line coach this year. And it's actually been far more of an improvement than what we had seen with Dixon. And Dixon, the year before Peyton, actually was very solid. I mean, it was very solid. It went down. Then they replaced it with Cain. And, it's been exponential growth. And I got to ask you this. Obviously, we were talking about Nick Benito, but as a whole, that defensive line unit, is there anyone specifically that has just impressed you the most? Obviously, it feels like a hard question to ask, because you are getting contributions from everybody, but who's truly impressed you the most through 7 weeks?
I mean, it's got to be Zach Allen, just from a complete standpoint. Here was a guy that took over for Draymond Jones. It was really a split decision in terms of Broncos country. Do you pay Draymond the money? Do you keep him? He looked like he could potentially be a superstar, and the Broncos replace him with a guy out of Arizona named Zach Allen that had played for VJ in the defense there. And he's been just absolutely tremendous. I mean, the tackles for loss, the pressures, he's way up in the. I mean, he's actually forget about the Pro Bowl. He's playing at an all-pro level this year. So you really have to mention him. But you know, Big Mike referenced John Franklin Myers.
Yeah.
We got him for nothing basically on draft day, and the contributions that this guy, the Malcolm Roach signing was brilliant. DJ Jones, everybody, including us, suggested he was overpaid. $10 million could go a long way for this team if we just dump this guy.
Yeah.
And he was hearing those murmurs, I'm sure. And we kept him. The team kept him. And here's Flying Dragon Films. We've hypercritical of George Payton, especially for his contracts, but his trades and player evaluation has been solid. And these are all examples of that. Putting together these guys, keeping a DJ Jones, despite not even. I don't think he restructured his contract. I think he's still at the $10 million. If
I think that's right.
And he's been great, with the exception of costing Cody Barton a second touchdown. But I think it's got to be Zach. But I'll pose the same question to you. Who would be jumping out for you?
I gotta say, it's the guy we were just talking about. It's Nick Bonito for me. I mean, I think everybody's going to be talking about Zach Allen, and rightfully so. He is playing at that All-Pro clip, and he's playing at the and maybe it's twofold. I feel like, if you talk about Nick Bonito, you got to talk about the other guy that's next to him, and that would be Jonathan Cooper. And, but because to Flying Dragon Films point, those are two of George Payton's draft picks. And how often it's a realm, and the reason why I say this, it's a realm of possibility of where things are. I mean, look at the Denver Nuggets. They are a homegrown superstar team, right? They're a homegrown superstar team. I'll use that as an example. The Broncos very well could be looking at a homegrown edge rusher 1 and edge rusher 2 situation going on with Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper. Will it actually happen? I don't know. But it's pretty obvious they need to pay Jonathan Cooper here right after this offseason, maybe even sooner rather than later. Nick Bonito is going to end up coming in, not maybe not this year, but that following year is when they may want to start having a conversation with Nick Bonito. But you're seeing both of these guys just absolutely own the spotlight and perform with QB pressures. And I think for me, and one of the specific reasons why I say Nick Bonito is to what he was describing on DNVR, and that was the run defense was a bit suspect. He was a one-trick pony. He was a speed demon off the edge, and he was super, super impressive, as an edge rusher. And I got to say, when you look at it from his overall run defensive side of things, that's truly when it has been the most impressive from Bonito. And that has just been, when you look at it just from the complete side of things, it's just been a beautiful side of football to watch for me. Gage, how you doing, buddy?
Good. Surprise.
You're a bit tardy.
Yeah, just a little bit. Figured
fashionably late, we like to
well.
call it. So, Gage, we were just talking about some of the standouts, of the rushers for the team. I obviously said Zach Allen was the one. For me, Cam went with Nick Bonito. You can pick either one of those guys as well, but who really stands out? We're going to throw you right into the mix here right away. But who are you most excited about this year so far?
John Franklin Myers, to deviate from you two. I mean, he's been kind of the glue that's made this entire defensive line better. He's helped Zach Allen. He's helped DJ Jones. He's helped the edge rushers. That was the big ticket move this offseason. The fact that they got him for a future 6th-round pick, and considering the Jets gave him up for Hassan Reddick and had to go through all that fiasco, and they're just now getting Hassan Reddick back, and John Franklin Myers has been a consistent producer for the Broncos all year long, that's a very easy choice.
Yeah. So Flying Dragon Films comes in with Jonah Ellis can make Browning, Bonito, or Cooper expendable. I actually disagree wholeheartedly with him, not because of any disrespect to Jonah, but so Bonito still has one more year on his rookie deal. He's a 3rd-year player, but Coop, 7th-round draft pick in his 4th year. Same with Browning. Actually, they're due for contracts. I think Cooper is definitely going to be, and I love Barron, but I think just based on the injuries, you got to put Cooper as the priority to get him back. We've paid him, no money essentially over these last 4 years, and this guy has been an emotional leader, just a force on the field, and a producer as well. I don't think he's expendable at all. Do you?
Yeah, well, and if you're making this a multiple choice, or kind of like eliminate the what is the right answer, the player who John Ellis will be making expendable is Baron Browning, and unfortunately, it's due to those injuries that he's also kind of making himself expendable, sadly. And he's a great talent. Like he's a phenomenal talent. He just unfortunately can't stay healthy. I will say in his defense, in the game back to this, into the Saints, it was just him kind of feeling his oats out a little bit, back into play action. He did time some snaps, but again, that's just attributed to him not playing, much of football, recently. It was unfortunate, but that's just, the nature of, unfortunately, like how things happen. But yeah, I would just say Jonah Ellis is probably the one that's going to be making Baron Browning expendable.
Yeah, I would agree, especially considering the way that Jonathan Cooper has played this year, and he's been the guy who's been able to consistently stay on the field. It's just a health issue for me with Baron Browning. I just don't think at this point that the Broncos are going to end up giving him that second contract. I think that he's probably going to be let go on the free agency market, and the Broncos will probably recoup a compensatory draft pick in return, depending on what they do in free agency, because it's all about mathematically how many free agents you gain versus how many free agents you lose. But that's going to be interesting as we get further and further into the season, especially as Baron Browning starts to get his feet wet a little bit and starts to get a little bit more comfortable, kind of like you said, Cam. And because just like you mentioned, he had those issues where he jumped off sides and just kind of looked like he was a little bit rusty out there. I expect him to be able to shed that, especially coming up this week against the Carolina Panthers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think there's a possibility that he doesn't get the contracts that offers that he's potentially expecting from around the league and could come back on a prove it 1 year deal for the Broncos next year?
I do, actually. And I think a large part is just because it's both ends of the spectrum. He very well can enter, I'll just use this as an exaggeration. He could go get the Bradley Chubb deal, right? Like none of us, saw Bradley Chubb earning the $20+ million deal, but there could be a team. There easily could be a team that just values, Baron Browning. Right, just need one. Just views him as that one team that is going to just overpay. I'll just throw out a team. Obviously, they got Judon, but the Atlanta Falcons, like just overpaying, for a guy like that, and he ends up being your edge rusher one based on how you're paying him. But I think if you're going to do just look at it all, you're probably talking about upwards of probably maybe a $10 million deal or something like a basically a 2-year deal, $20 million contract, if you will. But I wouldn't be shocked, 1 year, maybe even that 2-year, $20 million deal is actually the deal that he actually signs to come back here. I wouldn't even be the least bit surprised about that. My computer.
And it's hard to criticize him too, because not only is he a likable guy, but his talent is really, is there. He's got Von Miller type of traits and the bend and just the moves. And that's why it is so sad for him, for the team, and for the fans, is that we haven't been able to see him healthy for long periods of time, because this dude is he's a really talented rusher.
Yeah. He's definitely good.
Gage, you actually get a straight up question for yourself.
Sure. So I think that Bo is definitely showing signs of growth and improvement every single game. We're not seeing those boneheaded turnovers that we saw in the first couple of weeks. We're seeing Bo make some progress in the way he's reading the field, stuff like that. But obviously, I think it's fair to say that he took a little bit of a step back as a drop back passer against the Saints. I thought that from a run game perspective, RPO perspective, that was all executed very well, but his footwork has to improve. he's got to be able to throw with his hips and with his lower body, generate torque and velocity that way. And that will hone in on some of the accuracy issues and some of the skittishness at times, bailing from clean pockets. It's kind of you get the best of both worlds there and you get the worst of both worlds there. I don't know how to say that right, but I mean, you're going to get those plays where Bo makes that incredible scramble for 20 yards, makes a couple of guys miss, but you're also going to get those plays where it almost looks Russell Wilson-esque where he bails out of the pocket. So I don't think it'd be fair to sit here and say that Bo Nix is perfect or is where we need him to be or anything like that, but I think he's right where we expected him to be in his development. And I think that the future is very bright as he continues to put things together. So overall, I think there are some things that I definitely want him to improve on, but he looks like a rookie quarterback who's starting to put stuff together.
So how do they work on his footwork? Like, what are some of the things, do you know, behind the scenes or during practice, or some of the ways that they get his fundamentals back to where they need to be?
Well, the thing with that is like that's something you really dive headfirst into the off season. Like once you get to like February, after you've had a couple of weeks to go down to Cancun and kind of soak in the season. And after that is when you can go work with guys like Jordan Palmer or even somebody in-house and they can really hone in on his mechanics. If they mess with it too much, I feel like it could end up being a recipe for disaster. They just got to be patient with it this year. And throughout the offseason, that's something they can really hone in on and fix.
Yeah, and I think even if it's a bit minor, just the towel exercise that we saw him kind of do, before the game was. I mean, like it seems minor, but like that kind of thing can really help you, set your base. But I just think that I think Glenn and I had this conversation before the show, and it was just like, and I think it was, even Sean Payton said this, is just his running ability has lifted the ceiling of this entire offense more than I think all of us kind of had. And I think that, where you look at it from both sides of things, I actually like the fact that one of his biggest criticisms and, critiques is his footwork, because that is fixable. And I think that, the good news is we're not talking about a decision-making problem. Like we aren't exactly talking about a decision-making issue. And I think that the fact that he's got that, I think is a very good thing. And I'm not comparing the players, but I think that with where they're at development wise, I kind of look at it to a certain degree of maybe where Lamar Jackson was with the Baltimore Ravens, because when Lamar Jackson was coming in, he was kind of using his legs for the majority of everything. And then it kind of took, some, maneuvering and everything, based on like how he was also able to get better, in the pocket and, as a passer, to basically what he was at, Louisville. Because I think people forget a little bit that when he was at Louisville, he was in a pass first offense. And so he kind of had to get back to that. And so I think that for Nix, he's kind of relying a little bit too much on his legs at times. And I think that's fair. But I think that just just the fact that stuff is there, right? The fact that you can clearly tell stuff is there. And specifically, as we mentioned, in the Saints game, you saw a little bit of some incremental passes thrown to the tight end involved a little bit more. I thought it may seem small, but I think that was a big thing just overall for this offense going forward.
Also his awareness is excellent. When he does peel off to run, rarely does he end up short of that first down marker. He really knows where to reach, where to go, when to slide, when to dive. Mm-hmm. He's got awesome awareness and has had great success in converting first downs. So Flying Dragon asks a question about another head coaching candidate that was in the mix when the Broncos ended up going with Sean Payton. After 7 games of the Chargers, do you guys think we dodged a bullet by not getting Harbaugh?
Why don't you go with that, Gage? It's a hard question to answer.
It really is,
Yeah.
because we've seen games where the Chargers have put together a complete game, such as the Broncos game, and they really dominated Denver from the jump. We also see games where looked like last night Justin Herbert was kind of a little bit limited out there. Granted, I didn't see the whole game in its entirety. I was kind of driving home from watching the Buccaneers game with a friend, but from what I saw out of that game, it definitely looked like Justin Herbert was almost being held back. It looked like we were seeing a watered down version of Justin Herbert, and that lines up with some of what we've seen this year. What I questioned about the Jim Harbaugh hire dating back to the offseason was hiring Greg Roman as his OC, because every single time we've seen Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator, he's had a running quarterback, be it Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, be it Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo, be it Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. He has always operated with a running quarterback, and Justin Herbert is athletic, don't get me wrong, but he's not a running quarterback. I'd say right now, Bo Nix is a running quarterback and would probably play pretty well in a Greg Roman offense, but it's just this schematic fit and almost nepotistic hire that never made sense from the jump, that made me start to question, okay, is Jim Harbaugh really serious here? Or is he just kind of like, oh, let's get the band back together from San Francisco, run it back 2012 style?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think
Baltimore
that,
too. It was,
yeah, I think there's always going to be this element.
His
It's the Chargers. What's that?
He grabbed some of his brother's guys too. Like he needed familiarity on the coaching staff and with the players as well. And again, I'm with you, Gage. I was watching the Tampa game, and so I missed a good chunk of the Chargers Cardinals. But what I did see, and then you see the box score after the fact, and it's like, how did this team like boat race the Broncos for 3 quarters at home last week, and their only output for scoring were 5, was the result of 5 field goals and absolutely no touchdowns from the offense. It's just shocking that it's the same team that the Broncos ended up losing to in a game that we probably should have won.
Yeah, it's such a very interesting question, because schematically, given with where the Broncos were, I felt like the Jim Harbaugh fit with Russell Wilson was better. I will say that. I thought the overall fit of where things were was a bit better. Now, I think given with maybe what we know about Russell Wilson and with what he showed in a very heavy run-centric offense, didn't exactly work out that way, So I feel like, but then I think there were times where, given with where things are, that the Broncos team are going to outperform and win some games under Sean Payton that they should not win. And I'm looking specifically at some of those games here down the line, like that Chiefs game, maybe even that Baltimore Ravens game. But I just think that, so I think for me, knowing with what we have, I very much would take Sean Payton over Harbaugh at this point. And I mean, because I will say, personality wise, I don't think it really would change much. You know what I mean? I don't really think it would change too much. Because, they both kind of have their, egotistical vibe to them, arrogance, vibe to them. But I think that just from where we are and from what we're seeing developmentally, I very much would rather take the younger quarterback with, that longtime Hall of Fame coach, than Jim Harbaugh at this point.
With Greg Roman and Justin Herbert. And that's not a knock on Herbert.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've mentioned the Panthers a few times. 1-6, just an absolute disaster. Have already given up on the first pick of the draft from a year ago. A guy that they gave up everything for, including Caleb Williams. And they come into Denver. Strangely enough, Andy Andy Dalton and his family and their dog. His wife, his 3 kids, and dog got in a car accident today. So apparently nobody had to go to the hospital, but hopefully all of them, two-legged and four-legged, are okay tonight. That's a pretty scary situation. But coming into this Sunday, Mile High Stadium, Power Field, what do you think is going to? I mean, are we going to see an absolute light show, or what do you expect from the get-go here?
Man, I think first things first. Plan on Bryce Young taking being in line to start. And if you're Bryce Young, objectively don't have a deer in the headlights look, because like the way that it's all setting up just feels like it could end up being like a deer in the headlights situation for Bryce. The Broncos defense
is he supposed to start?
It looks like it.
Yeah,
I hadn't heard that. Oh, okay.
Which is, I'm just more looking at it just from the view of given the Andy Dalton situation that like it seems appropriate for them to give Bryce the nod there. But I mean, like, yeah, he can't have that. But you go into the Broncos defense, you're licking your chops because like this is the opportunity where you could be able to feast, and you cannot lose this game. You cannot lose this game. The Chargers game, to be blunt, was not one that they should have lost. And they cannot afford to do the exact same thing with the Carolina Panthers. So they have to take care of business. And, I would not be surprised if this is one of those, more of those complete games that we did see against the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where in this case you might actually get the chance where you get to see a 2-touchdown game from Bo, through the air, and then also maybe some rushing touchdowns. And and to go a little bit further here, I would not be the least bit surprised if we actually see a 200 and 100 yard game from Bo Nix, 200 through the air and obviously 100, on the ground.
Yeah, I totally agree. What up? I totally agree. I think that in this game, you look at what happened against the Chargers, where they obviously lost the turnover battle early with Bo Nix throwing an interception, Javonte Williams putting the ball on the ground, and Justin Herbert from the get-go started to carve you up. Neither Andy Dalton, first of all, glad Andy Dalton's okay, a very scary situation, glad his family's okay, glad the puppy's okay. This is obviously a situation much bigger than football, but I don't care who's starting for the Panthers, Andy Dalton or Bryce Young. Neither one of them are good. This Panthers offense is terrible. And their defense, as much as I love Ejiro Evero, that defense is one of, if not the worst in the NFL. They are equally as bad against the run as the New Orleans Saints. Their secondary is beat to hell with injuries. Their 2 best defensive players in Derek Brown and Shaq Thompson are both out for the season. It's just bad news bears in Carolina. This should be a boat racing. Carolina gave up, I believe it was almost a 40 burger to the Commanders last week with Marcus Mariota in at quarterback. Andy Dalton was awful. Their defense was awful. They couldn't run the ball because they were behind pretty much the whole game. I anticipate this to be a very similar situation. I think that this defense is so bad that offensively Denver should be able to get off to a quick start. They should be able to run the hell out of the ball. Washington rushed for 200 yards. I would anticipate Denver's going to do the exact same thing. This run defense has a bunch of no-name guys up front. It's bad. So if Denver doesn't put up at least 30 points, and this isn't at least a 2-score game, then we've got problems here. I don't just anticipate Denver to win. I anticipate them to go in there and take care of business and steamroll them from the jump. That's what this team needs to do. They need to kick the living shit out of teams they're supposed to kick the living shit out of. And the Panthers, you can make an argument that they're the worst team in the NFL, and the Broncos need to take advantage of that at home.
Yeah. And it's a huge opportunity at a perfect time. I expect I mean, I'm thinking something along the lines of like a 38-13 victory. But one thing I really want to see happen is I don't want us to defer until the second half. I want us to take that first drive because the worst thing that can happen, and the Broncos tend to do this when they defer. I don't know what the percentages are, but it sure seems like they end up giving points up on that first drive to the opponents. And boy, would that be a downer to a team that sucks this bad. So presumably we should leave this week at 5-3, entering our two toughest games, at least up until this point, at Baltimore and then at Kansas City. Just jumping the gun here. What do you guys anticipate happening in Baltimore going in as presumably a 5-3 team? That let me point out. If the season ended right now, we would be in the playoffs.
Stop the count.
I know it's a silly stat, but but we've been down for so long that when you actually are in a position this deep into the season, it feels pretty good. So anyway, sorry guys to prolong the question. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, first things first, it's not prime time. So the door possibly for maybe a not so great Lamar Jackson game is there. But I think that, for, specifically just from the Broncos side of things, and obviously from just Bo Nix for just a second, I think that given with where his play has been transpiring over these last handful of weeks, if he puts together another very solid game and maybe a better game against the Carolina Panthers, that's an ideal game that you have to have before going up against Baltimore, because specifically as a young quarterback, if you can stack these games together, it just means that you're going to have confidence week in and week out, even as you go forward and playing the Baltimore Ravens. It's going to be a tricky game, because I think that unfortunately, stylistically, with the way the Broncos have been operating their offense is somewhat similar to what the Baltimore Ravens have been doing with Lamar Jackson. But I think it's going to be a dogfight. I think it's going to be very much a dogfight to the very end. And I do suspect that the Broncos are going to be, fighting to the very end. It's not going to be a blowout, I don't think. But it's going to be a pretty tight game.
I'm going to actually go on the opposite end of the spectrum here. I think that Denver's going to get their teeth kicked in that game, and it's going to be exactly what they need, because it's going to give them fuel to go into Kansas City the following week and kick their teeth in. I think that Baltimore is one of, if not the best team in football right now. We saw what they did against Tampa Bay. They started off down 10-0, and then they went out and scored how many unanswered points? It was 34. Very much how many?
34.
Okay, so it is exactly the same as that Broncos-Raiders game. I think that Baltimore they are in their best position right now to go in and win a Super Bowl. They are dominant on both sides of the ball. Derrick Henry on the ground, Lamar Jackson through the air and on the ground. They are dynamic, and I think that it's going to be really tough for this Broncos team to keep up with that. But again, I think that's exactly what Denver's going to need. They're going to need a humbling, man, because I do anticipate them beating the Panthers. And of course, there's the old adage of any given Sunday, but with how this defense has played and with where this team is right now, they are in a position where they should kick the teeth out of the Panthers. And we said that, yes, about the Chargers, but I think we underestimated the Chargers a little bit as an opponent. I'm not underestimating anything with the Panthers. We have consistent tape of them giving up 37, 38, 40, like for 5 weeks in a row. That has been their point total defensively. And offensively, they had that one good week in Las Vegas with Andy Dalton, but outside of that, they've gotten boat raced. I just don't see this Broncos team losing to this Panthers team. They are not good. There are days where the Chargers actually play good football. The Panthers are not good, and Denver should take advantage of that.
So, Gage, Panthers have scored 110 points, and I'm just looking, and that aside from the Giants, that looks to be Titans at 106, Chargers at 106. I mean, the Panthers are probably sixth worst in terms of scoring. How many points would you guys say if they've scored 110? How many points have they given up in 7 games this year? Would you guess?
Oh God. I'm going to say it's probably 250.
I'll say 3.
243 points. No other team has given up over 200. There is a 133 point differential in 7 games. That's almost 20 points a game.
Yeah.
That's 19, right? So like, holy crap, that's bad.
They're not good. They are not a good football team. I don't care who's playing quarterback for them. You could legitimately put like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen at quarterback, and that is a 6-win football team max. They are not good at football.
Yeah, so I said 38-13. What do you guys have for this weekend?
Man, I will say I will go with 30. I will go with 30-13. The Broncos win. But I still think it's going to be convincing. I mean, it's still going to be enough that it's going to be convincing, and it's, and you're still feeling really good. And in fact, actually, I'll go a step further with my Bo Nix prediction, and I will actually say that he has 4 touchdowns, 3 through the air, one running.
I think that Denver is going to win 34-17. Carolina might score a garbage time touchdown, but I think that Denver is going to come out and they're going to run the ball down their throat, limit possessions for them offensively. I think Denver's going to rush for 200 on the ground, just like Washington did last week. Washington boat raced this team with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. They didn't even have Jaden Daniels, but for the first drive of the game. Denver is in prime position here to take advantage of that. I think Bo Nix is going to have a good day on the ground. I think he's going to have a solid day through the air. I think Denver wins 34-17. It's not going to be close.
That's awesome. So, I mean, it's been a lively chat. Great show. Gage, can't thank you enough for making it on tonight, and Mike jumping in on the chat. He had to work late. But do you guys have any other parting topics that you want to jump in with?
No, I just real quick about the Baltimore game. I think one of the other reasons why I feel like it could be a really tight game is, I think it was KB mentioned it in the chat, but like Baltimore has shown the propensity to be inconsistent. So like, as much as we've been kind of talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and, Andy Reid, at times like losing games they shouldn't, Baltimore has also pretty obviously shown that, they've kind of played down a little bit to their competition, still come away with wins, but they kind of play down to their competition a little bit, kind of leaving in that window. So, I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why I'm a bit not more optimistic, but just I'm optimistic for a much tighter showing and a much more of a defensive mindset.
So Baltimore's tied for most points scored this year with their neighboring team, the Washington Commanders, interestingly enough. So,
but I also heard.
Oh, go ahead.
I heard the stat today that they have also, I believe, they have the worst pass defense in the NFL this year. I heard that on radio driving home today.
Interesting. I'm less worried about Lamar than I am Derrick Henry. That picture of him running with the smile on his face last night. And this guy is, I mean, I thought it was crazy that a guy, not only his size, but his age was exceeding 20 miles an hour. And last night on one of the runs, he was over 21 miles an hour. So he's getting faster as the year goes on. I mean, it's not even, I mean, it's just incredible. The numbers that he's putting up. He's got over 800 yards rushing, and we're not even halfway through the season yet. I mean, this guy is on pace for 2,000 yards without a blinking an eye.
And that'd be the second time he's done it.
Sick. I mean, this guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer, would you say?
Yeah.
Has to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, Well, I was going to say before the show, you and I were saying, I don't know what's more terrifying. Ashton Genty in the backfield standing like Michael Myers, or, Derrick Henry running at you, 20 miles an hour with this huge, smile on his face, almost Joker smile. I'd be frightened.
And no one wanted him.
I'd leave my last will and testament on the field if I saw Derrick Henry run at me with a smile on his face. Like, just leave my will right there, because my dead body will be pulverized into the ground.
Can I make this point? And I haven't heard it made before, but he's playing with the same contract that we gave Melvin Gordon, 2 years, $16 million.
Excuse me, I'm gonna go throw up now.
So before we go, Flying Dragon Films, do you guys play Audric Estimate? Yes, of course we do. We got to give him another opportunity to not, to get the fumbling out of his system. I think this is a perfect game to get him some more carries. What do you guys think?
It might be garbage time, but it certainly would be worth. But it certainly would be worthwhile. To have him some reps. I don't know. I think it's time to maybe have him in the doghouse for a little bit.
Okay.
I'm kind of with Cam on this one. I think that he needs a little bit of time on the bench, because 9 carries, 2 times he's put it on the carpet. That's not good. So got to sit back, and he's got to go through those drills where he's got guys punching at him as he's trying to run through those whacking tennis ball things, whatever it is. He's got to do that drill. He's got to do all those ball security drills in practice. He needs to stay after practice and get those extra reps in. And once he does that, then I'm willing to throw him back out there. But he's got to learn to put 2 hands on the football, especially when you're trying to grind out the clock and get out of there with a win. It didn't affect the outcome of the game too much, but still, you're trying to grind out the clock. You need to put 2 hands on the football in that situation. And he left the ball exposed and it got stripped. So once he learns that, he's going to be fine. He's just got to learn the famous saying from Brock Osweiler: ball security is job security.
And he would know.
Right. I stand corrected. So why not play Blake Watson this time?
Got to call him up. You got to call him up because they sign it back to the practice squad. So you got to call him up to the active roster,
which is very easy to do.
Yep.
Right. All right, fellas. Well, I mean, hopefully next week at this time when we're talking, we're gloating over a 5-3, record, still second in the AFC West, and going into a tough stretch, but feeling even better about it than we are today. Thank you so much to the chat. It's been awesome. This show, the reason we do it live is, to get these comments and to talk about these topics and to know what you're interested in. And all of our shows, for the most part on the network, are live. So please feel free to jump into any of them and participate. Everybody is welcome, except for Raiders fans, of course. But that being said, thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle. Wait a minute. Work hard for the car, so that's why it's all tinted.